Adelante. Vale, Claudio. Yeah.
Welcome. Welcome everyone to Amazon Tech 2024. Today we start the second session and the title is 4D Technology for Biodiversity Monitoring in the Amazon. I'm María Elena Gutiérrez, Executive Director of Conservación Amazónica, ACA, and we are extremely happy to be with all of you today. We are honored to have such a tremendous group of speakers and conservation leaders in these 2 hours. As you may know, ACA has worked for almost 25 years with authorities, indigenous people, scientists, and civil society to conserve the Andes Amazon of Peru. With our amazing network of partners, we present Amazon Tech, our annual event, which is a platform where key actors from different sectors, backgrounds, roles, responsibilities come together to learn about innovation in science and technology and to discuss the challenge in order to encourage an exchange of information, promote local action, and public policy to protect the Andes ecosystem. Last year, Amazon Tech theme was technology to avoid a boiling Amazon, to provoke discussions and actions to face climate chaos and biodiversity crisis. This year, we want to highlight an unprecedented technology and scientific advantage to understand and conserve biodiversity, to have a nature positive, an Amazon positive. Today, we'll have a brief overview of the innovation and disruptive technology that serious organizations are working to understand and monitoring biodiversity on the planet. We will be witness to powerful technological advances, the geospatial revolution, DNA genomic libraries, tools to listen to nature and identify what is there, the use of artificial intelligence, big data, and cloud computing, and also creating global networks to face in the gap in the data, all of this that we call 4D technology to have an Amazon positive. We came back from the COP16 with great enthusiasm, not only regarding the final commitments, but also for the huge participation of civil society, private sector, and more importantly, indigenous communities, because they are the first defenders of the Amazon. This COP has been described as the largest conference on nature protection to date. This may reflect the growing interest in protecting biodiversity in the context of the planetary crisis. However, for this interest to translate into concrete action, it's essential to address the interconnection between biodiversity and climate change, expected for the next COP30 in Belém. In this regard, conservation technology play a very relevant role, considering the capacity to generate information, the speed and the integration between various data sources. I don't want to finish without expressing my gratitude to the key allies for Amazon Tech, especially Norway Corporation, NORAD NITSI, for their support. We have been working together to protect the Amazon for the last 9 years in Peru. Also, I don't know if Claudia can share the slide, but I want to thank the many amazing organizations that hopefully you can see in the next minutes in the screen, who have helped us this year with the Amazon Tech mission, specifically to share knowledge. Now, I want to introduce you now to someone very special, with an incredible research background and unlimited passion to understand the Amazon. Corinne Brisendorf will be our moderator today. Walking with her along the field trails at Los Amigos and Waikecha biological stations was an incredibly enriching experience. Actually, a master class on tropical forest ecology and biodiversity conservation, but in an amazing and really engaging way. Dr. Brisendorf is one of the few researchers who has ventured into this most pristine, wild, and scientifically unexplored area on this part of the continent. Dr. Brisendorf is based in Colombia, in Bogota, and is a senior advisor to the Science Panel for the Amazon. She's a plant ecologist with more than 30 years experience in the Amazon. And for 21 years, she was the Field Museum Rapid Inventory Team. I want to take the opportunity to announce with great joy that next January, she will start as ACA new Director of Science and will be based in Cusco, Peru. Gracias y bienvenida, Corinne. The floor is yours.
Hi, Maria Elena. Thank you so much. Thank you for those warm words of welcome, and thanks to ACA, and thanks to all of you for being here today. This is going to be a fast-paced session chock full of interesting information about technology. And I'm going to get us started right away. We have a keynote speaker. That's Eric Dinerstein. He has a track record of more than 48 years in field conservation. He was chief scientist at the World Wildlife Fund for 25 years, has pioneered field studies and conservation programs for tigers, rhinos, elephants. He's been involved in the design of conservation plans for iconic sites such as the Galapagos, the Chihuahuan Desert, the Himalayas, the Panda Mountains of China, and the Great Plains of northern Montana. He has conservation experience in many countries, published numerous books and papers, especially on large mammal conservation and global biodiversity conservation. He is the senior expert in biodiversity at Resolve and the CEO of Nightjar. And for the past 8 years, he's been co-leading bringing an IA-based camera alert. Eric, we cannot wait to hear from you. Please take it away.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Corinne, and thank you all from ACA for inviting me. Enrique Ortez, who first made the mention to Sydney. It's really a pleasure to meet so many great conservationists and scientists in this talk. It's been a rough 3 weeks for those who are friends of the Earth, between the COP perhaps not achieving the goals that we would hope in biodiversity targets, the recent election in the United States, the COP on climate happening in a petro-state. It's hard to find positive notes, but perhaps the one that resonates with everybody is the tremendous advances that we've seen in conservation technology in the last 5 years, the last 10 years. And so that's what really this talk and the ones that follow are about. This is a real bright note. I'm going to go far beyond the Amazon because conservation technology has been invented in a lot of places and innovated. So this is going to be a world tour a little bit. Okay, great. So there are about 300,000 terrestrial parks in the world. About 80,000 are under threat. We need technology, including AI, to become a force multiplier because there's too many parks in the world that are understaffed if we get to 50% or 30% by 2030. And the number of biologists that we have to survey these areas are far too few to cover these vast areas and all these species. So technology is going to be a critical ingredient. The points I'm going to cover in this talk are just some reflections on integration of the most promising next generation conservation technologies, the potential and challenges of monitoring using the current systems that we have. I'll zoom in on a few clear use cases from anti-poaching, human-wildlife coexistence, and species identification, some of the constraints of applying these in tropical forests, and then what I see as the road ahead and some creative financing to solve these problems. So first, if it were only as simple as for the climate side, we could probably get by with just one monitoring station on the top of a volcano in Hawaii to know levels, atmospheric levels of CO2 because of the mixing of CO2 in the atmosphere. And so that's easy. But in contrast, just the opposite, for biologists, tropical rainforests are incredibly complex and require many sites to gain insights. We can't just use Los Amigos or La Selva, or in this case, in this picture here, the Tesonilo forest in Sumatra, where we're deploying some of our technologies. So in order to be able to have the greatest effect in these vast areas using technologies, there's still an ingredient that is absolutely essential, and that's keen biological insight. We have to remember when Darwin spent 30 days in the Galapagos visiting 5 islands, he didn't have the benefit of AI or even a laptop, and yet he still came up with the greatest innovation, insight into the structure of the biological world. Similarly, when Adrian Forsyth and Enrique Ortez came up with a plan for the Andes Amazon, they didn't have AI, they used keen biological insight. That's what has to guide us, and that combined with conservation technologies can be a dynamic pairing, and that's really a main theme of my talk. So one of the first targets that we have to focus on is what we call conservation imperatives, a paper we just published a few months ago in Frontiers in Science that documents almost 17,000 sites where we have the last chance to conserve species that are narrow range endemics and considered critically endangered or endangered. The countries are the Amazon, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, not essentially in the Amazon, but in other parts of those countries, are responsible for about 25% of all these sites. So a critical role to play, because should be the first targets that we set, the center of the bullseye for conservation. You can join us tomorrow. We're having a webinar. This will be posted in the chat on conservation imperatives to join us and learn a lot more about this particular target for biodiversity. But let's start with a possible comprehensive vision for mapping, monitoring, and protecting life on Earth. I'm sure everybody has their own vision of what this looks like, but here are some elements that might be common threads. The first is the tremendous advances we're making now in being able to see biodiversity from space for the first time. Amy Rosenthal will be on this call later, but the work that Planet is doing and the potential for the Tanager platform to bring hyperspectral sensors to space to be able to see the turnover of species with distance and elevation, beta diversity for the first time, say to be able to map the distribution of fig trees, the keystone species of tropical rainforests, that could be at our fingertips. But all of that work from satellites is only going to tell us what's going on the canopy. And much of the speakers in this conference are going to talk about what happens below the canopy and how we monitor that, whether it's through camera traps and optical images, whether it's through acoustic monitoring of rare species, whether it's eDNA, and then on the protection side of stopping poachers and loggers before they commit harm, and then monitoring our fragile biota, looking at connectivity and bringing them into platforms like TerraAdapt and others that have real-time monitoring and updating of the status of lands, and bringing in citizen scientists in a creative way to help us monitor, map, and protect life on Earth. So this is just one vision, but there's many others of how we have to integrate in the next few years to have the greatest possible impact. Just in my career, very briefly, again, it's this link of biological insight with conservation technology. You might notice a very bare resemblance to the people in this picture, but starting with monitoring tropical bats when I was working in Costa Rica and Panama, using the first telemetry to put on the backs of bats to learn basic questions about where do bats feed, how long do they feed. Then in 1986, I was lucky to be involved in the first radiotelemetry study of greater one-horned rhinoceros that answered critical questions that led to their recovery in a number of landscapes and rewilding and repopulations. And then finally with tigers, we used to joke that the only creatures more territorial than tigers were tiger biologists. But we managed to work together, use new technologies to gain important insights into the movements of tigers, their territoriality, their spacing, their dispersal, that's led to conserving tigers as metapopulations and doubling the number of tigers. The critical thing we have to look at, though, from this continuum is conducting research versus preventing loss of biodiversity. For some field projects, gathering data and the basic parameter looking at this or dichotomy is if we need real-time information or not. And so critically, for a lot of wildlife studies, we don't need that. But for real-time alerts for preventing poaching, logging, et cetera, we do need these real-time alerts. And that's a major bifurcation. In our own work, we've introduced a new camera-based alert system with AI on the edge that combines a very small form factor, can connect from anywhere, cellular, satellite, long-range radio, long battery life, low cost, and out of the box. You just plug it in and it works. There are other technologies as well that can contribute to gaining more insight into tropical forests. It can also prevent poaching. So here's examples of 13 reserves, 6 countries, where nobody has discovered the camera yet. It's so cryptic and hidden, or even the tigers, you can see in this picture that comes very close and doesn't detect the camera. So cryptic small systems, miniaturization is a critical part of new conservation technologies. In our case, an important thing that we're focused on, less so in the Amazon, but a critical problem around the world is human-wildlife conflict. Here, the AI can be so accurate that it can be agnostic to the angle to the animal, still detect them, send the images over a cellular system to a smartphone in 30 seconds or about 3 minutes via satellite. We can also use this to make sure that we don't we can protect animals from poaching. Here, example, in the Dudwa Tiger Reserve, we have poachers on the same trail as a tiger, different time periods, but the poachers were detected, arrested, the tiger went on to live its life. You can learn more about this work by going to the YouTube link at the bottom of this, and we'll put in the chat as well, published in Bioscience. We're also working with another critical problem in Asia and Africa of conflict, and here it's with elephants. So in India, tigers killed 116 people last year. Elephants killed 615. Imagine, for those of you living in Peru or Ecuador, if jaguars killed 116 people in 1 year. That's the kind of pressure there is in other places. And so by using this system, we are able to detect elephants before they get into trouble, accurately, 100% accuracy. And in places where we had 13 people killed and 25 injured over 2 years, there were 0 because we could detect them, get the alerts to rangers, and get them in between elephants and people before there's conflict. Okay, AI, critically important, but let's take a quick quiz. How many of you on the calls are mammalogists? I'm sure a lot of you. You can see the tiger. That's easy to identify, but you see the sambar here. Well, that's actually not a sambar. It's a white-tailed deer. Some of you neotropical mammalogists recognize that, but the model we ran it through detects Indian wildlife. The best it could do was calling it a young female sambar. So where this is getting to is, I think, the next stage for AI and for models for wildlife is we can imagine almost an on-demand regional or park level species detectors where you go to a database, you identify the species that you want, it creates a model and brings it back to you that you can use, that makes it focus on just the species that occur in your area, and you can detect those, rather than trying to do a vast number of species and add a great deal of error into the models. Human-wildlife conflict is so important around the world because if we're going to get to rewilding, a prerequisite for rewilding is coexistence, and a prerequisite for coexistence is to getting people to live alongside large dangerous mammals. And so that's part of what we're trying to do with our technologies, which probably works in areas of the fringes of the Amazon. There are many other conservation technologies that are worth talking about. For example, many of you are probably using distance sampling with camera traps to get population estimates. There's a new technology that's out now, a new technique where you don't even need to measure them anymore and do these reference videos, is you take the pictures and AI, after the fact, can estimate that distance and provide that vital information. We can use these same systems to monitor the functional use of corridors, which is critical for managing metapopulations around the world. We can use them to detect species before they get into conflict. So the next step, besides detecting species that get involved in human-wildlife conflict, is to trigger alarms that scare them off before they get into trouble. There's another way we can use camera systems to integrate with drones, such that, say, in the Amazon, you could have cameras at critical choke points, send the images, and then that goes off to launch a swarm or a single drone from a box that can track, say, intruders coming along reserves in boats. The biggest innovation, the space to watch, I think, in the next year, aside from AI, is satellite communication. We're about to witness an explosion in the use of satellite technology to transmit data where we need real time, whether it's optical or acoustic. Here's an example. We're using for the first time a brand new $46 satellite modem chip that can send data in about 3 minutes from the camera to your cell phone. What it does, the trick is going from the large file, the JPEG that's stored on an SD card, cropping it to just the interested object in the bounding box and only sending that, which makes it much smaller. But the greatest gap that I see is I see that we need to make conservation technology as accessible as possible. And the greatest blocker for everybody is the lack of a financing mechanism that can accelerate low-cost manufacture of essential technologies. We've been fortunate enough to now manufacture our system in India, but it's really difficult. As an anonymous innovator said, anybody can build a prototype. It's 10,000 times more difficult to manufacture at scale. We need to solve this problem of financing promising new technologies to make them ubiquitous, and to do that, we have to make them very low cost, and that's where I think major donors can come in and help really advance conservation. Coming soon that Amazonian biologists can really help on is an iconic species index that we're working with a number of top scientists around the world to come up with that could help the global biodiversity framework. The basic assumption here is that there's a subset of 10 to 15 focal species per country, where if you monitor their population, their trajectory, their conservation interventions across multiple landscapes, it serves as a powerful proxy for conservation innovation in a nation or say even across Amazonia. Here's my first stab at coming up with species that could be monitored or are being monitored that could fit into this iconic species index. If you don't like it, you can also contact Carlos Perez as well, who's helping on this. So in sum, I know there's a lot of graduate students on this call as well listening, is something that really has guided me, and I think the most important aphorism I've ever heard that came from my colleague David McDonald. There's so much conservation technology that can help us, but it's really important to combine that with that keen biological insight. And as David so beautifully captured it, it's really easy to be interesting. It's much harder to be useful. So that's really our goal, is to take these conservation technologies and make them as useful as possible for conservation. Thank you.
That was fantastic, Eric. Super exciting to think about making low-cost technologies, having it be really a force multiplier, and thinking about these over 5,000 sites in Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, where we could do things like that. We're now going to move to a presentation by Henrik Cox. He is a biologist and data scientist. He has a PhD in ecology and evolution. Oh no, he is, so sorry. He's the head of product at Conservation X Labs. Henrik leads the team behind Sentinel, an AI product advancing wildlife and environmental protection and used in 10 countries. So sorry about that, Henrik. Their work has been recognized by the United Nations, by Earth Ranger, by AI for the Planet, World Economic Forum, and others, and it emphasized the benefits of edge AI technologies in some of the most remote parts of the world. So thanks a lot for being with us, Henrik, and it's all you.
Thank you, Corin, and thank you, Aka, for having me. No, I can't say they have doctor in my title, but maybe one day. We'll see. Yes, so my name is Henrik Cox. As mentioned, I'm the head of product at Conservation X Labs. I've been with them for over 5.5 years. And I lead the team for a device that we've been building across those years called Sentinel. And essentially what that is a device plugin that, confirm your speaking language. I am speaking English. We build a device that plugs into trail cameras. So your favorite brands like Reconyx, Brownings, Bushnells, we plug in a device that will allow the cameras to work as normal and then filter a lot of the information, the blank images, and then highlight specific species of interest and send that information to you via satellite, LoRa, and cell networks. And Eric, this builds very well on top of the work that you're doing with TrailGuard and talking about the explosion of satellite technology that's coming up next year. So on the next slide, you'll get a bit of an infographic into what that looks like. So working with the trail, working with the cameras themselves and allowing them to operate as normal, and making sure that we're not replacing full systems, making sure that people who have their favorite brands get to continue working with them. And instead of building out a full replacement, we are improving upon what's out there already. And so we've already talked a bit about some of the AI solutions. And on the next slide, what we've been doing, a lot of our bread and butter has also been in the animal identification, looking at specific species, and every single deployment we've worked on is its own use case. So we do a lot of work with invasive species and looking at invasive rodents and being able to send those kinds of insights back relatively quickly when it comes to having to respond to these environments and these events that are happening. And a lot of the time we're working in some very dense and remote parts of the world. We're working in places where there is little to no kind of internet or connectivity whatsoever. So we have to be flexible and we have to be adaptable in terms of the models that we're training and the kinds of deployments that we can work on, and how we can be flexible for the local scenarios and the partners who want to work with this. On the next slide, so we've built out a full system. We have our own kinds of software to make it a lot easier to spot what's happening in the wild in a lot faster than having to go get SD cards and process images by hand. But we're also playing with a lot of integrations with other platforms in the space. So I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with Earth Ranger. We're also integrating with Smart. And so we just want to be a piece of the puzzle where there's not going to be one perfect solution for all of these problems. Of course, we're focused on terrestrial vision. There's a lot of folks who are focused on acoustics. There's a lot of work in marine spaces as well. And so it's good to work with partners who are able to pull in all this information together and make it useful for as many people as possible. And in keeping with a quick time on talks, I'll end it on the next slide, just to give a couple of case studies. So earlier this year, I had the privilege of actually joining the ACA team in Peru, and there's a colleague of mine, Dante, in the bottom left there. We spent a good couple of weeks out with the team to understand what the deployment needs are and putting up a handful of devices to understand what kind of species we want to be monitoring for, which particular species we want to send quick notifications about. And then more in the experimental realm, we're also touching on things like video AI models, looking at behavior, looking at disease monitoring, and then potentially one day doing a lot more scalable work in individual re-IDs, so touching on abundance, population count, those sorts of things. And then I mentioned, so on the next slide, I mentioned we do a lot of our work in invasive species monitoring as well. So this is probably an area that we're doing most of our work in today, where we're looking at specific invasive species and native wildlife on islands, very fragile ecosystems, particularly remote as well, away from any kinds of connectivity for the most part. But this is also a part of where we're seeing the use of a lot of camera trap systems and grid systems that are being put out in the field, and where these kinds of Sentinel devices can actually be relatively impactful and helpful for the local teams to respond quickly to such events. So on the last slide, on the next one rather, I'll end it on this. This has been kind of quite a big roller coaster of a journey for the team. We've been working on this, as I mentioned, for over 5 years now. 3.5 of those spent building prototype after prototype. So for anyone who's looking to get into building nature tech and conservation tech, you're looking at what that years of work can actually lead up to. As mentioned, we are now working in 10 countries, and we're hoping to keep going with that number, and hopefully with a lot more of the satellite connectivity that pops up next year and the options around that can grow relatively quickly. So I'll leave it at that, and thanks again for having me.
Henrik, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Really looking forward to learning more how well Sentinel is working in all of these places and what we can dream about. I now want to turn to Nelson Boaini, who is a biologist and data scientist with a PhD in ecology and evolution, and he is the data science lead of Wildmon. He spent more than a decade dedicated to biodiversity research, and he leverages his expertise to lead the development of AI solutions for species protection. Nelson, really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you guys for joining. Thanks Conservación Amazónica for the kind invitation to participate in this session. My name is Nelson. I'm the lead data scientist at Wildmon. Next slide, please. We are a nonprofit organization, and our goal is to transform the way that we do biodiversity monitoring by combining acoustic data, camera trapping, environmental DNA, also with cloud structure and artificial intelligence in a way that we can provide comprehensive biodiversity monitoring that will hopefully empower people to inform, to make informed decisions and promote conservation. Next. Traditional biodiversity monitoring usually tries to answer a few of these questions in the slide. But we typically find some issues mostly related to how much we can sample in terms of time and space when we need to send people to the field, and also about the cost of it. And that leads us to a little bit of a gap in terms of the knowledge that we can produce. Next slide, please. And one of the possible alternatives to it is acoustic monitoring, and more precisely, using autonomous recorders. So with this, we can go to the field with a very small team of people. We can deploy hundreds, if not thousands of devices. It's less invasive. We can cover large areas, and the recordings can record continuously and also simultaneously across sites. But of course, this leads us to another big problem, which is we now have hundreds or thousands of hours of audio that we need to process, and it's humanly impossible to accomplish this without assistance of technology. Next. So the way we are trying to tackle this question, this issue at Wildmon, is to accomplish this pipeline in the screen where we go to the field, we deploy a bunch of recorders, we leave it there for as much time as we need. We retrieve those devices, upload the data to the cloud. Once the data is on the cloud, it's safe and is accessible to everyone that needs to work on it. But it also allows us to run sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithms like convolutional neural networks, but we also use some species-specific search that only requires one or few samples to look for rare species. And because of the way that we set up the analysis in parallel and working with feature embeddings, which are lightweight representation of audio, we can actually look for thousands of species over thousands of hours of data in only a few minutes. So this is a massive change, I think. And we like to always present the results, these detections, to our scientists who can use a user interface, very intuitive, so they can confirm some of the presence of those species, making sure the results are accurate. And once we have those confirmed validations, we can combine with remote sensing data, and generate insights from that data, like where the species are, what are the factors that influence their distribution, and everything. And we typically like to display that in an interactive dashboard that people can look at, decision makers can look at the information in a digested way, and just very accessible. So we try to accomplish this pipeline in the fastest way as possible. Next slide, please. So I brought up a couple of examples here for you guys, a couple of projects that we have. This one is in the Peruvian Amazon, where we were trying to, we were assessing the impact of mining and abandoned gold mining and gas exploration on the biodiversity, and we found that sites with active mining and abandoned mining had significantly less species compared to forest areas. And as further away that you went from those mining places, you tend to have less species as well. So this is just an example of a quick, simple project that we can get some information of the impact of those type of activities over biodiversity monitoring. Next slide, please. This is another example of a project that we had in Caribbean island of Puerto Rico. It's a pretty big project. We deployed over 1,000 recorders. We're able to find almost 100 species, including endemic species and threatened species. Some of them are invasive. Next slide, please. And what we found was that there's currently a mismatch between the currently protected areas and the areas that are going to be suitable for the species in a scenario of climate change. So this is the type of information that's very useful for decision makers and people, governments and people that make the policies that impact conservation, so that they can update their policies and just adjust to future scenarios. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is only a couple of examples of very, I think this is only at the beginning of the potential of the technology that we are using. I think we envision a world where we have permanent stations across the globe, providing real-time biodiversity monitoring, combining different sources of data, and centralizing that data in a platform where people can exchange knowledge, they can form collaboration and just integrate people and data in order to make evidence-based decisions that support conservation and the environment. Next, thank you so much for joining. Feel free to contact me at wildmon.ai or in my email. I'll be looking forward to talk to you about some of the work that we've been doing. And yeah, thank you.
Nelson, that was fantastic. Thank you. I just want to make a quick note that on ACA's social media sites, so on Facebook in English and on YouTube in Spanish, this is being live streamed. Our next presenter is Ovidio Chilik. He is an assistant professor of remote sensing at Wake Forest. He's an expert in forest mapping and remote sensing, experience at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. And he's led innovative mapping projects at multiple scales and regions across the tropics. Ovidio, it's all you.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Ovidio Chilik from Wake Forest University, and today we'll explore how cutting-edge airborne sensor technologies are transforming our understanding of the tropical forest biodiversity and ecological dynamics. So we'll have a look at the blend of satellite imagery, LiDAR, multispectral and thermal sensors to uncover the hidden diversity of this vital ecosystem. Next slide. Now, imagine standing in the heart of the Amazon rainforest and you'll be overwhelmed by the complexity of life that is around you. But now the question is, how do we measure this complexity? So we use a variety of methods, from ground surveys, airborne sensors, and satellites. So ground surveys provides detailed information, but are most of the time labor-intensive and only cover limited areas. Satellites, on the other hand, gives us a broad two-dimensional view with varying spatial resolutions, as we see in the figure on the right, revealing the vastness of the forest. But to truly understand the forest structure, we need a three-dimensional perspective, and this is where laser scanning, or LiDAR, comes in. So LiDAR penetrates the canopy and captures everything from the tallest trees to the forest floor, giving us a detailed map of the forest architecture, as we see on the far right of the image. So this multidimensional approach is crucial for capturing the full picture of forest complexity and is a game changer in ecological monitoring. Next slide. So here you see a LiDAR point cloud visualization of a region with some of the tallest trees in the Amazon. Each point represents a laser pulse that bounced back from the forest and created a three-dimensional representation of the landscape. This kind of data allows us to map and measure not just the canopy, but everything underneath. So we can distinguish between different layers of vegetation, identify gaps, and even detect changes over time if we repeat the measurements. So this ability to see through the canopy is improving our understanding of forest ecosystem, enabling us to study habitat structure, biodiversity, and carbon storage with unprecedented detail. Next slide. So combining high-resolution satellite images with airborne LiDAR data, we can map and estimate above-ground carbon stocks with high precision, and satellite images provide extensive spatial coverage and temporal frequency, while LiDAR offers detailed structural information. Combining these two types of data, satellites and airborne LiDAR, and integrating them with AI allows us to create high-resolution maps of carbon stocks and monitor changes over time at high resolution. Such detailed carbon mapping is essential for tracking the health of our forests and understanding their role in the global carbon cycle. Next slide. If we shift our focus to Africa for a moment, this is one example where I've been using radar sensors in space, which are less affected by cloud cover, and developed a near real-time monitoring system for tropical forests. So unlike optical sensors, a radar can penetrate clouds and provide reliable data under all weather conditions, ensuring that we have continuous monitoring. So this technology minimizes cloud contamination and ensures more reliable data, and we can track carbon changes at a fast temporal resolution. And in these examples on the screen, we have a selective logging example with a monthly pattern of expansion. Next slide. In a more recent study, we analyzed a large data set of repeated airborne LiDAR over the arc of deforestation in southern Brazil. So this region is a hotspot for deforestation and forest degradation, and we identify fine-scale disturbances and their drivers with remarkable precision. Alarmingly, we found that forest disturbances contributed 5 times more to carbon losses than deforestation, and the subtle ongoing degradation processes like selective logging and understory fires are often overlooked but have significant cumulative impacts. So the carbon sink from forest growth couldn't counterbalance those losses, making the region a net carbon source during the study period with repeated airborne LiDAR. Next slide. So beyond three-dimensional laser scanning and carbon dynamics, we can use multispectral and hyperspectral aerial scanning to delve deeper into biodiversity. So these techniques can capture a wide range of wavelengths that will provide us with detailed information about the forest composition and health. For example, here we see different species that reflect light differently, allowing us to identify species distribution and monitor their health. So this additional layer of knowledge on top of the satellite images or drone imagery and laser scanning helps us to understand not just what has changed and how much was lost, but also the underlying ecological processes. So we can study species interactions, track the spread of invasive species, and assess the impacts of human activities and climate change. Next slide, and the last one. So finally, let's talk about wildlife monitoring on top of everything I just presented. So complementing traditional methods like collars and camera traps, thermal drone sensors detect heat signatures, allowing us to monitor animals with minimal disturbance, even in dense forest. So thermal imaging is particularly useful for studying nocturnal or camouflage species that are hard to detect with other methods. So this technology provides a new window into the lives of these animals, helping us understand their behavior, habitat use, and responses to environmental changes. So to conclude, understanding the complex dynamics of the Amazon rainforest requires equally complex sensors and approaches. And by leveraging ground, airborne, and spaceborne technologies, we can unravel the intricate web of life in this forest. Thank you.
That was amazing. I've always loved LiDAR and the carbon mapping, but the hyperspectral look at a forest is super mind-blowing. We're going to keep moving. Our next speaker is Rudmeri Pilko. She is a Peruvian biologist and National Geographic explorer. Rudmeri leads the Andean Bear Conservation Program at Amazon Conservation ACA at Waiquecha in the buffer zone of Manu National Park in the Peruvian Andes. She is recognized as a Disney Conservation Hero in 2022 and a Woman of Discovery in 2024. And Rudmeri is celebrated for her outstanding work in conserving threatened species using science, restoration, and education. Welcome, Rudmeri. It's all yours.
Thank you, Corinne, for the warm introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to share how groundbreaking tracking technologies are transforming the way how we study wildlife, especially those are threatened species. Next, please. Next. Typically, tracking devices use satellites for location acquisition data like GPS or Argos, and in many cases also use this satellite constellation to transmit this data to the end user. So these devices have been used for a wide diversity of species, from sea turtles on the marine ecosystem to big mammals like elephants in the lands, and even in birds in flies. So these devices help research to track animals in any part of the planet, whether they are migrating across continents or when they are found in very remote areas. Next, please. So real-time tracking is very important to monitor threatened species like the Andean bear, especially in rugged and remote areas, but also in regions that are facing human-wildlife conflicts. So thanks to these devices, we can monitor migration routes, home range, and how they are adapting to environmental changes. And finally, we can get a big insight into their movements, patterns, behavior, and how they're interacting with the environment. And subsequently, this can give us effective informing decisions for action plans. So in our case, we are using satellite collars, iridium satellite collars, that help us to track the GPS location, but also these devices are equipped with accelerometers. This sensor measure the activity and energy expenditure of the bears on 3 axes, like up and down, side to side, and forward and backward. So we can translate this data into activity patterns like foraging, resting, and others. Next, please. So we are doing that in the buffer zone of Manu National Park. Our base of operation is Waiquecha Biological Station. So we have a team of wild biologists, local people, and wild veterinarians. We are using Snachi tracks, these black cages, where we attract and trap the bears, and then we place these satellite collars. So far we have been able to place these collars on 5 bear individuals. Next, please. Could you play here, please? Click. It's a video. Okay, so here we can see how the bears are using the different landscape. They are moving from forest to grassland ecosystem, but they also have a space where they spend most of their time, and sometimes they go out to these long explorations, either to search food or to find a mate. However, you see the green bear, he was very adventurous, and he went very far, potentially looking for a place to establish. So all these areas, especially the grassland ecosystem, is an area where there is agriculture, cattle grazing, mining, so many things happening on this ecosystem. Next, please. So that's So from that, we can learn that bears and other wildlife, they don't know about political barriers. So the bears being used in the national park, about 2 different conservation private areas, a regional conservation area, about different 5 communities. So here the importance that we need to work with the local government, the local authorities, and the local organizations, but also the extent of area that they need. So these birds are using between 100 to 300 kilometers squares. No, this is the area they need to survive. So again, the importance of have connectivity of big landscapes. Next, please. So in addition to these tracking devices with basic functions, we are using camera collars, no? Where we can attach a separate camera into the collar, or some collars come already with a built-in camera. So that allows us to see the behavior from the bird's perspective. So again, a better understanding of their environment. So traditionally, to validate the data from the accelerometer, we need to verify with activity patterns of captive animals. So in our case, we are using these devices to ground truth the activity patterns in wild and Andean bears. So next, we can develop models where we can use the data from the camera collars, and then we can use in the traditional collars. Next. Please click, it's a video. So last year we were able to capture one bear, and we placed this camera collar. Please, okay. So for example, here in the high Andes, we can see how they're feeding on berries, but also very important, the bromeliads are very important food source for the bears, both in the dry and in the wet season. So they are very arboreal species and they climb the trees in order to get these resources. But also we place this camera collar in a bear who's been using a lot the lowland mountain ecosystem, and it's a bit wild, no? So we got very exciting findings like potential infanticide, no? In several locations, the bear was found feeding on bear cubs and also feeding on woolly monkey carcass. So we don't know if he actually hunted or maybe he found dead, but also feeding on a different diversity of fruit species, some of the new records that we didn't know, but thanks to these cameras color, we are understanding better their behavior. And something very interesting we found is the social interaction. No, there is little information about mating system in wild species, and this bear spent about a week, mating with a female bear. They were sleeping together, playing and mating in the canopy and also on the ground level, and also many other interaction like aggressive interaction with another bear, even geophagy, so exciting information. But of course, there is still challenges like the battery life. So in our case, we have this camera collar only for 4 months. For 15 seconds videos every hour. And of course, in order to get these videos, we need to retrieve the collar. And thanks to the team, we were able to retrieve that. Next, please. And thanks to this information, as I said, we can start building models and also start getting a better understanding of the movement patterns. So in the case of this bear, it spends a lot of time traveling, then foraging, resting, and a little bit of time is going specific interaction like like mating, playing, and aggressive interaction. Next. So any of that wouldn't be possible for the support of the team, thanks to Conservación Amazonica, or international collaborators, our local people, or volunteer research interns, and that make possible this work. We still have more needs to keep tracking these threatened and elusive species. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rudmiti. That was incredible. Infanticide, seeing what a bear sees. That is amazing. We are going to move on to Andreas Coulter. He is an expert in biodiversity genetics and the use of genomic tools for species conservation. His work focuses on the sequencing and genetic analyses of rare and endangered species, providing critical knowledge for conservation and management of biodiversity globally. Andreas, can't wait to hear from you.
Hello, Hello, everyone. My name is Andreas Kolter. I work for the Center of Biodiversity Genomics in Canada, Guelph. And now we are going from very big animals to very small animals. And my presentation will be about DNA barcoding of Amazonian plants and insects. Next. So what is DNA barcoding? First of all, it's a technique, but it's also a vision where we are able to read the biosphere of the world just by the DNA. Next. But not all of the DNA, just a very small fragment of it. So we are going to sequence here at the CBG the CO1 gene, which is just a 660 base pair, which is 1/1,000,000th of a genome. Next. There are, roughly speaking, 3 sampling methods for the barcoding, which is, next please, which is individual sampling of insects. And what we mostly do is metabarcoding, though, of bulk samples. So another option is to just sample the environmental DNA, which has been shed by the organism. Next. And what are the challenges and benefits of that technology? Well, first of all, it's very internationally standardized. On the left, you can see a map of all the barcodes we have on our systems, and they are publicly accessible. So there are about 16 million barcode sequences available. And the growth is more than 3 million barcode sequences a year. Not every barcode represents one species, though. That's important to keep in mind. A challenge is how to get 3 million specimens every year. Click, please. So you can see that the map on the left has quite some gaps left there, and we are trying to close those. And another challenge is that you require a reference database, because just the DNA sequence by itself will not tell you a lot. You have to compare it to a DNA database, which is already established and has voucher specimens available as metadata. Another benefit is that the technological advancements are extremely fast-paced, so it is now possible to sequence DNA virtually anywhere where you can take a backpack. The DNA sequencers fit in the palm of your hand. The cost of the sequencing has gone down dramatically to just 10 cents per specimen, but it can even go lower. And unfortunately, a challenge associated with that is those sequences are very technically complex to work with. But with training, it's absolutely possible to apply these methods anywhere in the world nowadays. Next. And these are some examples for the application of DNA barcoding. You will come to realize that most of these applications are also possible without using any kind of DNA. So why should you use barcoding? Barcoding offers almost endless scaling. So recently we had just a single sequencing run, which had 1 million insect specimens in it, not the whole DNA, right? Just the DNA barcode marker, the CO1 gene. But it's very cheap and very affordable to scale it up. So it's possible to take a lot more samples than classically would be possible, because biologists are highly in demand, but low in supply usually. So what you can do is you can look at blood meals and of mosquitoes, for example, and you can find all kinds of different mammals which the mosquito has fed on. You can look at the gut content of caterpillars and then associate the host plants with the caterpillar, or you can associate parasitoids with the caterpillar. You can look at taxonomic diversity and specific clades. Next. You can also look at cryptic diversity. Next slide, please. And also, because it's such an affordable technique, it is very easy to use across timescales. So, for example, you can try to answer questions like what happens during climate change, where do the species move, by setting up traps in the whole area and continuously monitor them for very little cost, compared to having to go in the field every single day and collect those specimens. So the samplers we are using are called Malaise traps. They are passive samplers. They look a little bit like a tent, and the insects basically collide with them and then fly up or drop down into a preservative solution. And 2 of the studies we did with that, next please, with these techniques are a biodiversity inventory in cooperation with ACA, of course. And we set up those passive samplers at elevations between 220 meters and 2,900 meters. And those samplers collected more than 300,000 insects, which we all individually imaged and sequenced. And from these 300,000 insects, 60% of the putative species in these collection were new to bold, despite already having those 16 million records. So they didn't match anything. 60% of the species we found in this collection we did there, and 50% of the species we found in this collection were just represented by a single specimen. So there's a lot more work to do. We still haven't reached the end of the tunnel. And what is also remarkable is that the overlap between the sampling sites was extremely low. Waikacha 2,900 meter and Los Amigos in the lowland, overlap was below 1% of all the insects we caught, and we caught quite a lot of them. So in total, in these 300,000 insects, all of these projects are still ongoing, so these numbers are not final, but we estimate to have more than 40,000 insect species in those 300,000 insects. Next slide, please. And finally, another study was about pollination and orchid bees. Orchid bees are quite charismatic bees, and we were able to hand catch 2,200 of them. And of course, we were looking at the pollination, and by looking at the DNA itself from the gut content, so just the DNA in the gut content, not the pollen itself, we were able to detect more than 300 plant genera across 90 different plant families. And at the same time, when you take the gut content as a sample, you also get the microbiome basically for free. And that was very distinct from honeybees, although they are very closely related. So that's also very interesting to look into. And then what was a very surprising find is that we found 190 fungal families from 80 fungal orders in the gut content. We are still also analyzing that data, but the bees take up all these fungi from the flowers when they feed on them, when they take up the nectar, for example. But those specific kind of bees also visit those fungi, which is quite an interesting, but unfortunately very complex and long story. Please ask me in the QA afterwards. And what's also possible is to do a phylogeny based off the DNA of the bee itself. You also get that from the gut content, of course. Next, please. And these are all the funders we would like to thank. And also, of course, skip this slide, please. Next. These are all the funders I would like to thank for funding the work we do here in Guelph in Canada. And also, of course, big thanks to Aka for the very successful collaboration. And next, please, I would like to close my presentation with some pictures of orchid pollinia attached to orchid bees. Thank you.
Yeah, I loved all of that, but the last slide was phenomenal. Thanks, Andreas. We're going to keep moving right along. Our next presenter is Emiliano Ramalho. He is the Technical Scientific Director of Mamiroa Institute in Brazil, and he's the coordinator of Project Providence, which is a project that began in 2016 with the goal of developing and implementing a remote automated AI-based system. Its aim is to monitor and protect biodiversity in the Amazon. Emiliano has dedicated the last 20 years of his career to studying the ecology of jaguars and developing technologies to monitor biodiversity in the Amazon. Welcome, Emiliano. It's all yours.
First, thank you very much, Corinne and Aka, for the invitation. Very happy to be here. And what fantastic presentations. Thank you all. Fantastic. Okay, so what I'm going to the project I'm going to talk to you about today is in collaboration with the Polytechnic University of Catalunya, Mamiroa Institute, and funded by the Moore Foundation mainly. Next, please. I'd like to introduce talking a little about Mamiroa. Mamiroa is a research institution located in Central Amazon. It's a social organization, nonprofit, linked to the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation of Brazil. So it's a scientific institution linked to the government. Next, please. So we're located right in the middle of the Amazon, in the Amazon River, in an area that we call Middle Solimões area in Brazil. And we were the only research institution in that region of the Amazon in Brazil. Next. Mamirawa has a very important story in conservation of the Amazon because the Institute is responsible for the creation of the first Sustainable Development Reserve of Brazil. This reserve was created for the protection of the wakari monkey, this red-faced monkey. But the team, especially Marcio Aires, saw that this area was not adequate to protect just one species. There were a lot of people using their area and living inside. So they created the first Sustainable Development Reserve of Brazil, which breaks the paradigm of fortress-type conservation where people cannot access the area to a protected area that people benefit from conservation, also helping to manage that area and protect conservation. And I say that to present my first monitoring case. The idea of monitoring biodiversity under the canopy and monitoring biodiversity is the idea, especially when we lose biodiversity so fast as we're doing today, is that we can do it fast, right? And the first technology that Mamirawa is involved in is a social technology. Next. The social technology to monitor pirarucu. Pirarucu is the largest scaled fish, freshwater scaled fish on the planet. And it was overexploited in the 90s. And Mamirawa was trying to develop a method to count that fish. And traditional scientific methods demanded catching them, marking them, and then recapturing them, like we do with camera traps. That took weeks. But local fishermen, with their traditional knowledge, could count the fish because pirarucu come up for air, and they knew that adult pirarucu would come up for air in the same location if you don't disturb it. That allowed the counting of pirarucu to happen in an area that would take 2 weeks, to do it in 20 minutes. And this allowed this monitoring technology allowed the management of the species that occurred first in Mamirawa and today helps manage and benefits, has not only allowed the recovery of pirarucu populations in over 400%, but also to manage pirarucu throughout the Amazon and benefit hundreds of thousands of people. Next. But the fact is that, and many people show this, is that when we talk about the whole biodiversity in the Amazon or more species, what we have today, you can click on the video, please. What we see today is that we have effective methods, like we showed in one of the presentations, that can monitor what's changing from above. But the fact is that working in the Amazon, you all know, is very hard to detect species underneath the canopy. So next, please. And I've been working with jaguars for over 20 years in Central Amazon, especially in the Várzea floodplain forests. And detecting biodiversity, this is just an example. We saw many examples of insects that are really hard to detect, tigers in other tropical areas. It's very hard to detect. So we need, when I was thinking about monitoring biodiversity in the Amazon, I was thinking we need technologies that need to monitor biodiversity at a fast pace. I was worried about cost, but not so much. My first worry was a system that could be implemented at a scale of the Amazon that would allow not a lot of maintenance and that could give results at a fast pace. And the estimation of cost that I have is the number of records I can get by the amount of not the price of the equipment, but how much information I can get from that location. And thinking of that, next, please. Oh, sorry. So detecting people is also another issue that we see in the other presentations. Next. So one of the first technologies also that we've seen in many presentations is the detection of animals with camera traps. But detecting animals with camera traps require that there's a specialized person that goes there and identifies the locations to implement. We need a central area to organize all the data. The analysis of the data is every day is more complex, and people need to be updated on that. And when we think about managers, this is very hard to do because managers have to do bureaucratic tasks have to implement research, have to look for funding. So this is very hard to do. So we thought of technology that could do all that and also use bioacoustics to do that. So next, please. So we developed Project Providence starting in 2016 with the idea of a technology that could integrate image and sound analysis in real time. So the camera traps that look like camera traps that you see, they recognize species by image and sound. They analyze in real time in the equipment, and they send information remotely. We've implemented that in Mamirawa Reserve back in 2022. The information is sent, well, obviously we don't send all the data, the raw data, because that would require a lot of bandwidth. So we send analyzed data via SAT, and the solar panel keeps it running. We've had these equipment running since 2002 in Mamirawa Reserve. Next. And so with sound, the same. So we saw many people showing image classification occurring in the equipment or after the image is taken. The idea with sound is the same. So the equipment is trained to analyze data. And so as soon as it sees that, let's say that signature of that species, it classifies, stores, and sends that analyzed information. And we thought of a solution that could not only monitor biodiversity in air, let's say in terrestrial areas, but also inside the water. So our system can not only classify and detect species that we hear in the forest, but also inside water. So we have classifiers for manatees and for river dolphins. Sorry, I'm going to pass because the sound at least is very bad for me here. I don't know if it's bad for you. This is so weird. So, but yeah, so the idea is that we can monitor biodiversity also inside water. Next, please. And going to the next level, we're developing this as a platform. So as soon as the data arrive, and today data arrives daily as resumes, we also generate habitat models for those species once the data arrives for that species. So as soon as data arrives, what you see lighted green is a node that has detected that species, and the area that you see here is Mamirawa. As soon as that information comes, it updates the model of where the species is supposed to occur, or if it changes, then where it's changed. Next, please. And then we have the data for each of those species. So if you want to know where that species has been detected over time, each square that you see is a specific species. Next, please. Activity patterns, that also changes as data comes in. Next. And then we also calculate bioacoustic indices that can tell if there's change over time, but also if there's difference between different environments in terms of the amount of life that's there. Next. And I'm going to close, Corinne, just showing two examples. This is the river dolphins that we're differentiating now from boats, from rain. The top ones are the clicks. Please pass to the next. I'm just showing that we can detect this, but we've been able to show the movement of river dolphins. I think you had to click twice there. We're able to detect the river dolphins at Boca during one period and then show that they've moved inside the lake when the water goes up using this technology. Next, please. Next. And also detect river dolphins that were really rare and that we did not detect in Lake Mamirawa, but as soon as we used bioacoustics, we were able to detect that they were there, and they were there with cubs. And then recently, as the last point is that we've been able to put this technology in a vessel that can be deployed via drones. And this is the last, I think you can pass it to video. So as a development for X Prize Rainforest, which was a competition for biodiversity monitoring technologies, we put that in a vessel to be able to deploy via drones. I think you have to pass, I don't know who's the last video, please. Oh, no, so this is where, sorry, just go back one. So this is where we are right now. These are all the locations where we have nodes. The numbers are where we're still going to deploy. The closed nodes are where we have deployed, and the squares are our water nodes. Next, please. And this is just a video of the technology that we deploy. It's the same. The core is what you've seen in the tree, but inside this, there's a node, and you can deploy this anywhere here. This was the test plot or the final plot in the Amazon. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the finals, but there was no access via ground, so it had to be deployed by air, all technologies. This is what we call the drop. It's pretty much something that you can deploy in a tree or in water. The same technology can go with a hydrophone, can be deployed in water, or it can go on a tree, and then it's a regular hydrophone mic. And it has camera, it has stickers, so we can collect DNA samples in water or in the trees. And it has acoustic and satellite transmission.
Emiliano, I'm going to have to jump in here.
No problem. No problem. I understand. I apologize for that.
Move on to the next. Thanks for the patience. Thank you so much, and hopefully folks can catch that online. And that was fascinating to think about being able to sense river dolphins moving from one place to another. We're going to move on to Amy Rosenthal. Amy is the Senior Global Director of Conservation Initiatives at Planet. She leads the company's public benefit-oriented biodiversity programs. She used to direct the Keller Science Action Center at the Field Museum in Chicago. She has more than 20 years in philanthropy and conservation, developing scientific and community-focused strategies for sustainability and nature protection. Amy, it's so great to have you here. Welcome. It's all you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Really a delight. And Corinne, to be able to see you again. And it's always hard to follow Emiliano and many of these incredible presenters that you've gotten leading conservation technologists. I am going to share with you a little bit about the technology that we contribute. So as Corinne mentioned, I'm Amy Rosenthal. I am the Global Senior Director for Conservation Initiatives at an aerospace company called Planet. I'll be talking to you today about one of our initiatives, which we call Project Sentinel. So first of all, what is Planet? We are a company that makes shoebox-size satellites in order to understand the changes that are occurring on Earth's surface. Our mission is to image the whole world, which we've just about accomplished, to do that every day, making change visible, accessible, and actionable. We're also a public benefit corporation, which means, like any nonprofit, we have a mission that we take very seriously and report on annually. We use space to help life on Earth. We start with this premise that you can't fix what you can't see, and likewise, you don't manage well what you're not measuring. And so we aim to enable that for many folks all around the world. And we do that with satellites that we design, we build, we launch into low Earth orbit, and then they line scan the planet, going from pole to pole, taking a high resolution image of just about every place in the world every day. They're complemented by a second constellation of high resolution tasking, which means you take an image of a place, the place you want, when you need it, in order to understand why and how that change occurs. In addition, if I can make this work, yep, we build on top of that ourselves and with partners, getting closer to understanding what those changes mean. We track soil moisture, land surface temperature, the biomass of crops and other ecosystems, how roads and buildings change around the world. And most recently, we've added to that the structure of forests, that tree height and canopy cover, as well as above ground forest carbon, because these are the things that we care about and they enable better decisions. We do all of that and we place them together in concert within a Planet Insights platform so that all of you in the Amazon or wherever you may be can look deeper, broader, back in time, closer at the things you really need to inspect, and then make the decisions that are necessary for policy, for markets, for enforcement, and for science. We use those tools to develop and now to deliver our newest digital public good program, which is called Project Sentinel. It aims to support the monitoring of vulnerable high biodiversity sites around the world. We do this because of what you heard from Dr. Eric Dinnerstein. There are places on the planet that are imperiled with the rare, the endemic, the threatened and endangered species that remain unprotected. These are the places that the next extinctions and extirpations are most likely to come from. It's like 1.25% of Earth's landmass, and still a question mark for what remains in the oceans and underwater, as we heard from Emiliano. And so we need to put eyes on these places and track their change, understand what's happening, and ensure more effective conservation. For that reason, we know that all of the data we produce and all of the imagery does nothing if it's not in your hands and the hands to do something about it. So our program aims to change that. For up to 50 places around the world in 3 cohorts, we will put a deep set of our data and analytics that I described into the hands of teams who are doing the hard work of effective conservation and stewardship every day. What I mean by a deep set is what you saw already in this presentation and more, from our daily imagery to our high-res tasking to analysis-ready data and the planetary variables that are the, let's say, analytics that are derived from our own imagery and the data from many different sensors and ground truthing, such as the land surface temperature, soil moisture, and others. We'll pull that together and provide access for 3 years because we know conservation doesn't occur overnight. And these technologies are really necessary now, especially to keep up with the pace of change as it occurs and to get ahead of permanent damage. So as we think about our data stack, as you can see in this slide, we're providing the raw sensor data, analysis-ready data, delivery vehicles, and planetary variables in the hopes that we can empower and enable the things that you are working on already, the insights that will inform the kinds of decisions that change the outcomes for the Amazon forests and for ecosystems around the globe. Why do I think this can work? Well, for a simple reason. One key example for me is a partner of ours, a Dutch nonprofit known as Just Dig It. They work with communities in East Africa to do something incredibly low tech. In fact, it's traditional indigenous practice. Community members go out with shovels and they dig these crescent moon-shaped ditches that are called bunds. And after they do that, what I think of as a miracle occurs. We can see in this imagery here of every 2 years within that white border area is where those bunds are dug. And you can see it gets greener and greener as it goes. At the same time that you can see it, and over time you can demonstrate that facts on the ground are changing, you can intervene and adaptively manage, or Just Dig It can, as you go. Because with the high-tech data and sensors that we provide, Just Dig It was able to track the changes in soil moisture and land surface temperature. That miracle that I mentioned, what occurs is that more of the morning dew is captured in those ditches. The rains that seldom come, they activate the native seedbed and begin to restore the native vegetation of that landscape that continues to grow. What it does first is it starts to increase the soil moisture. We know that because we looked at a treatment to control at before and after, and you can see it quantitatively daily, the average changes that occurred over those 4 years. You can also see that as that happens, the land surface begins to cool. As the earth cools, it creates more of this microclimate that allows that regeneration to happen at larger and larger scales, having a direct benefit to the livelihoods of those communities and pastoral households that reside there. As a result of this, in part, Just Dig It has been able to restore over 300,000 hectares and plant more than 10 million trees in sub-Saharan Africa. That is the kind of thing we aim to empower and support with Project Sentinel. And so with that in mind, we've begun with 8 sites around the world, with partners that we know are committed to doing the long and the hard work, and in places that need the attention, the increased biodiversity understanding, and the effective conservation action. I want to tell you about just 2 of them today in the Amazon region. The first is with our colleagues in Univaja, the Indigenous Federation of the Valle du Javari, along with their partners Niatero and Texas App Solutions. Together, they are working with the existing vigilance and surveillance teams of Univaja to say where are the places that we need to watch in order to halt illicit gold mining and gold mining barges in their tracks, to stop incursions on and defend homeland areas, and to monitor the integrity of ecosystems within this area the size of Portugal. We can put the techniques of tip and cue, monitoring daily and getting a higher res image to magnify what we know in the places that have the greatest risks with the kind of tools that we provide. And we can then support that understanding, those efforts, that monitoring, and the enforcement of that territorial sovereignty. In addition, in Bolivia, with Conservación Amazónica, we're extremely proud to be working with that team on a wetland of international importance under the Ramsar Convention for the first time, to really have a better understanding from space of the health of a wetland and how that changes seasonally and over years, looking at the changes from pressures of cattle grazing, the benefits of more sustainable practices. I'm sorry, I should have said more sustainable cattle grazing, and the risks to agricultural-driven invasions, like from rice farming. So over time, we'll be able to provide support for the kinds of communications, work with stakeholders around how the health of this wetland is changing, how it changes week on week, how it changes year on year, and what are the right interventions and changes to stewardship monitoring and attention that are needed. What we'd like to be able to do is the same thing for many more of you who are listening today. We are accepting up to 50 applications to power the kinds of conservation efforts and initiatives in sites that need it in the Amazon and elsewhere. What we're looking for are sites with high conservation value, independently recognized, with documented risk to biodiversity from one of the top drivers of loss. We're thinking about areas that are at a landscape or a seascape scale that is smaller than 15,000 square kilometers. And we'd like to prioritize the places that have gotten less attention in the recent past, from philanthropy, from policy, from market-based solutions. That includes those freshwater ecosystems, grasslands and savannas, as well as coastal ecosystems. And for the teams, we are looking for groups, not necessarily from one single organization, but from the folks who have the biodiversity expertise, some experience with remote sensing, and also a long-term say or a stake in the place that's been identified. The application is as simple and as quick as we could make it, and the process starts with an expression of interest on our website, planet.com/project-Sentinel. We look forward to hearing from many of you and to helping in your efforts to be part of the solution to avoid a tipping point in the Amazon and to ensure effective monitoring and conservation in the region to come. Thank you again for listening to my plea, for engaging with us at Planet, and also to all those who have engaged in Amazon Tech, have been a stakeholder in it. We need all of your solutions as we move forward. Thank you.
Amy, thank you so much. That was fantastic. I hope people apply and take advantage of this incredible project. I want to thank all of our presenters from Eric, thank you so much for your keynote. Henrik, Nelson, Ovidio, Rodneri, Andres, Emiliano, Amy, that was sensational. We learned so much. Thanks to everyone who's been answering. Thanks to everyone who's been listening. It's been sensational to see how many people are connected. And also thank you to those of you who put questions in the Q&A. Authors have been going through and presenters have been answering those questions. I know there are a few remaining questions. We're not going to be able to get to those, but we are going to be putting all of this information up online. And so please do connect with folks who gave a presentation, connect directly with Aka if you have remaining questions. And now I want to turn to the person that is going to help us close, Adrian Forsyth. Actually, I have a really long bio here, but what I'm going to say is that Adrian, at his core, is an entomologist and a natural historian and is one of the most amazing people to be in a forest with. He's done amazing things for understanding biodiversity, making philanthropy happen in the Amazon, building biological stations, training people, and it's a huge honor to have him close out this webinar with his thoughts. So it's all you, Adrian.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Thank you, Corinne. You're going to be a great science director. And thank you to Maria Elena and your crew at ACA for putting this together. Everyone who's talked did an amazing job of distilling briefly from years and years of work, presentations that for someone who began fieldwork with a notebook and pencil and Kodachrome have the feel of science fiction. It's probably the most exciting time to be working in biodiversity conservation just because of the tools that are now available. But I'd like to have a few remarks for young people who may be watching this about the fourth dimension of this. And those who, as Eric alluded to, might be feeling the bewilderment of seeing the nation with the most wealth, the best developed educational system and science infrastructure in the world, about to be led into a dark era where 50 years of climate science will not only be ignored, it will be discarded, and fossil fuel emissions will continue to drive higher globally. What do you think as a career about investing in conservation science when such a thing is possible? Well, Brazil survived Bolsonaro. The United States will survive Trump. Science has a durability that is rooted in its attention to the physical reality that political ideology and human culture can never attain. Those are more label, and they are not rooted in the reality. So what I see that people are now able to do is to describe the physical reality of life on Earth in a way that was unimaginable a generation ago. And that will be valuable, perhaps, in convincing policymakers and decision makers in the short term. But it's clear that we're in a teachable moment, an inflection learning point in which the planet is going to undergo climate chaos, where species and ecosystems will be driven rapidly out of their bioclimatic envelope. And the value of what's taking place right now may not be in the short or midterm. It may be centuries into the future when population, consumption, and climate have stabilized, and the people who endure in those societies will look back and say, thank you to the people who described the world when it was intact, who can have told us what it was actually composed of and how those things worked together in a way that made the planet healthy and productive. Would that we know that about the ocean when whale populations were what they once were. We have no idea about the natural functioning of oceans because there was never any description of the oceans when whale populations were at their normal historical high. So, young people, the science that you do, the conservation technology that you deploy, yes, it might be disregarded in the short term by policymakers and decisions. It will be of enduring value for the long-term future of humanity and for the planet. Do not shirk. Join us. Become part of this. That's what I want to say.
Thank you all. And this was the